Hello there. Tonight I wanted to talk about evolution and mythical creatures and how that is more possible and more probable in the future. Now, I know that sounds like, crazy talk. That sounds like preposterous. Couldn't happen. But here, I'm going to explain something to you, okay? Mythical creatures have been around since mankind's been telling stories. I mean, you get your traditional ones like Bigfoot, mermaids, Yeti, abominable snowman, all those sorts. They're more or less the Sasquatch, Bigfoot type characters. Um, the thing is, the stories about them are real. The only thing is the perception people have of them is not 100% accurate. And the reasoning why these stories were perpetuated, told, and then later supposedly debunked by people who seriously went looking for them, uh, it's psychological. Bigfoot, it existed. And it probably still does out there. Except Bigfoot is not some animal that we hadn't discovered before. In reality, what it would normally be is essentially something big and furry out in the woods. And this would be told to, young people so they wouldn't go wandering out there, like grizzly bears, wolves, you name it in North America, and that's where that sort of comes from. And there'd also be, like derelict homeless people out in the woods, and the, back in the day, they didn't exactly groom themselves. They wore animal furs and things like that. They're probably a bit crazy, and it was simply easier to dub them as Bigfoot and to stay away from them. Because you go, well, why wouldn't they go out there and like take care of the problem? Well, for one thing, they weren't all about that. They were about making money and getting drunk and that sort of stuff. So uh, that was primarily what the early settlers would do, is get drunk and try to make money. So, they didn't invest as much time in, dealing with Bigfoot type creatures or people out in the woods who were nuts. Who grow big bushy beards and long hair, and probably wouldn't be very many of them. And they may even encourage select individuals to go live that lifestyle simply because it could be used as a psychological tool. And it's scientific in the matter that from a distance they can be observed. And the thing about it being a mythical creature, in the sense that it's not a grizzly bear, it's not a wolf, it's not a wolverine or something like that, or a bobcat or a mountain lion. Those are all dangerous animals, but it's something that doesn't exist in that platform. So the problem is with mankind is that we get arrogant. It doesn't matter what the creature is, even if it is dangerous. As soon as you get to know it, you get to get used to it, and then you're less scared of it, and it can always surprise you. Grizzly bear, you see the videos of the guys who handle grizzly bears and things like that, and they do domesticate them a little bit, but it's still a friggin' bear, man, and it could, one day it could be in a bad mood and just swat you like a fly. So they needed a creature that, um, you know, doesn't entirely exist, so no one could find it. and still have the mystique of, you know, fear. Don't go out into the woods. Don't develop a tolerance to, uncertainties in regards to that subject. Like, don't be not afraid of going out into the dark, into the woods. Um, which is kind of why they create horror movie monsters. Like right now, I didn't watch the movie. I'm not into that kind of stuff. But there's a Slenderman creature that's supposed to be out there in the woods. Really, there's different adaptations of it, of course, and obviously that's not real, but it's along the same lines, and it plays on people's fear. And the thing is, a little bit of fear is a good thing. It keeps you from being stupid because you can get something right 1,000 friggin' times. You only have to get it wrong once. And it's the same thing with sea creatures as well. Uh, Take mermaids, for example. Mermaids don't exist. Not in that sense. It was a story that when sailors, pirates, slaves in early Europe went missing, presumably most of the time they drowned, it was to romanticize their death a bit better. And there were times in ancient mythology where there were women who were not quite mermaids, but it was an adaptation of it. Like you take Medusa, for example. Medusa was simply a woman, probably a screeching, horrible hag that nobody could tolerate. Anyway, they put her on an island, keep her there. Maybe she was the daughter of a dignitary or something like that. Perpetuate the story about her, that her single stare could turn people into stone and all that sort of stuff. But realistically, she just lived on an island, and she had guards that would bring her food and things like that, and some schmuck that the hierarchy deemed was to go to her island. They would basically grab them and throw them there, and probably they were prodding Medusa into being a bitch if she wasn't already one. And basically, what would happen is they'd bump them off as soon as they got there and build a statue of them there so that anybody going to observe the site would have seen it. And of course, over time there would have been different Medusas, of course, over the years. um, Somebody would have got pissed off. Somebody went, "I've had enough of this," and fucking destroyed everything. And they wouldn't have been wrong for doing that, but it wasn't helpful for us. And yeah, getting back to mermaids, a mermaid would have been an adaptation of Medusa. She had snakes for hair, supposedly, according to the mythology. And, that's sort of leaning towards the reptiling fish type thing. And, that romanticizes it when sailors drowned. Um, that was mostly how they perished. There was aquatic life that bumped off a whole pile of sailors too, like big sea creatures as well. And this was to when that happened, it was to pitch a better story to the family back at home, and also mainstream thought, instead of like simple little things like sailors back in the day didn't want to go into the water, and there was reason for that. They're on a friggin' boat and they're going in the middle of nowhere and they don't want to go in the water. That makes total friggin' sense, actually, because in the water is where everything dangerous is. You could drown. There's monsters in there, and all that stuff's real. Um, yeah. So a lot of them didn't know how to swim, right? And there is nothing more pathetic, and I do mean that with sincerity, than seeing somebody drown in 5 feet of water because they don't know how to swim and they're a sailor. It's like that's kind of embarrassing. So can't look pathetic in front of everyone, so they have to kind of make up a story. And these mythical mermaid type creatures would have fit the story. And the reason I believe that there's some in some shape or form of them being real is, if nothing more than storytelling, is that mankind is also not very good at storytelling. They usually need something that they've seen in order to tell it, and usually they exaggerate. And a way to make it seem different is to kind of put a caricature spin on it. And this serves many purposes, because that caricature spin could be caricature spin in itself in later times, uh, like with Medusa, as I said. Uh, Medusa would have been an earlier version of a mermaid, is essentially it. Um, and the Greeks were especially, very interested in the ocean. Well, A, because their enemies were attacking them from there, and that's where their primary food source, fish, was coming from. So, it makes sense that those kind of stories were created from that. And, getting back to the Bigfoot mythology and how, it's probably some crazy guy out in the woods. There are crazy people out in the woods, usually by train tracks, but that's a thing. And, the need to create those sort of things with an element of truth to them, but spun in such a way where it's not accurate, is still essential. So, all of that aside, involuntary celibates are essentially the Bigfoot, the mythical creature, the Sasquatch, Yeti, Abominable Snowman, the monsters of B that are used as a teaching lesson, warning lesson for others. And to be honest with you, that's a bit of an asshole move to do to someone, is to put them in a place and designate them as something, and then they become something else, which isn't true because, obviously a crazy Bigfoot man person out in the woods is not a good thing, but neither is an involuntary celibate who doesn't get to talk to anybody. It's, a different context, but it serves the same purpose, and it means that people are still manipulative. They still need them to do jobs that nobody wants to do, and that would be designated as a job that nobody would want to do. And for me, like, the only reason I'm not out and about doing what I want to do, and making fun for myself, because that's an important part of morale, is that fine. You want to make someone like me an involuntary celibate, a hermit, and things like that. Fine. I'll go have fun on my own. I don't need you at all. The thing is, I've got a disability. I got physical ailments that keep me from going out and about. I'm sure that those will dwindle away at time, and when they do, oh yeah, it's gonna be fun. I'm not gonna be confined to the woods that I live in. Tree jail, as some would call it. Aqua Teen Hunger Force reference. Um, Essentially, the people around you have had a chance to grow and develop their personalities, and they put people in a hoodie ring and observe them, and they are no better than when the Belgians used to have people zoos, when they would grab little black children and have them being watched by people like they were an animal in a zoo. That did happen. Um, And I mean, for most involuntary celibates in today's society, they want to remain anonymous. Most people want to remain anonymous. Me, it's a little late for that. I've made, 570 plus YouTube videos. I have an active social media account. I'm out and about whenever I can. Um, Taking, the back seat, being quiet, and essentially disappearing from people's thoughts because, out of sight, out of mind, was something that, I couldn't do. I didn't want to simply disappear because there were some assholes out there that were going to use that as a manipulative purpose. With me, it was, testing medications with, and they wanted to do it with impunity, and they didn't care that they, potentially could have created a monster. They certainly didn't give a fuck when they did it to other people, and they do it to a lot of other people. A lot of other people it happens to, and it's screwed up that society doesn't understand what that is. That there are people in positions of authority, and they think that because they say something, then that means that it's true. And it's like, you think what you want to think, but don't believe someone because they say it. And unless they have definitive proof, which they won't show you if they're an authority figure anyway, because they'll assume that you're a nobody and your opinion doesn't count for anything, it's like, why don't they fuck off? They're not interested in, stopping, negative thought or bad things or, that kind of stuff. They perpetuate it, but in a controlled way. So they go, well, we're learning, we know how to make things better, blah, blah, blah. When really they're the monsters. And they get paid to be monsters and they get away with it too. And it's not because they're particularly intelligent. They're not. They think they are, and that's arrogance, and it's also a sign of a pathetic ego that they hide behind what they've got, which most people could have attained had they gone down the same road as them. What they do is not particularly clever. um, Putting someone in a hoodie ring and labeling them and having people observe them around them, or just make them disappear like me, or they try to anyway. Because they were experimenting medications on me, so they were getting their money's worth anyway. And a guy like me, like as I said, I didn't want to disappear. I didn't want to, go off the radar in that sense. Okay, well, anyway, yeah, getting back to evolution and mythical creatures. Um, there are certain creatures that can and probably will exist in the future. And how it will be gone about, and it's the most simple biological way. I call it the Mr. Sinister phenomenon. Uh, Character from X-Men, all about eugenics, bioengineering, and all that sort of stuff. It's simple. You get somebody else to do the work for you. In this case, it's nature. And you can create whatever. Uh, Seemingly endless options of what could be done. Like, for example, cyclopses, they can be created um, simply by selective breeding. You pick people with eyes that are closer and closer to the center of their head, and eventually that would evolve into one eye. And people go, oh, well, that'll take thousands of years. Theoretically, but if you are abusive and will do anything and you pump them full of, growth hormones, and with selective breeding, then yeah, that would happen. And then you go, well, wouldn't that make them, unhealthy? And wouldn't it be bad for them overall? Well, this is part of the dehumanizing process. They don't care about being abusive, and they don't care about the health and well-being of their creations. And a cyclops is an example of one. Because there are certain drugs that slow down actually the growth process. Yeah, as obviously as everyone knows. And this also leads into this whole trying to create other genders thing. It's not going to be done with a scalpel. It's not going to be done with medication in that sense. It's going to be done by selective breeding, where certain characteristics are removed from individuals. And why somebody would think this was a good idea, I have no idea, other than they're insane. Um, but yes, it is actually possible to create other genders. What they do and how they do it, I don't know. And I'm not interested in that story. Um, it would simply be see what happens, I think. I think people in those kind of positions do those sort of things, not because they should, but because they can, and they want to see what happens. Um, and there are other things too. Like I did mention this in another video where there are certain human species in Indonesia where they were saying they were not quite human, but they were there and this, that, and the other. And I said that was fake. I didn't believe it. I just thought that they were small people. That's all I thought. And I didn't agree with that story, but I believe that there were aspects of it that were true. And you know, I also talked about mermaids in that video, and there are no mermaids because a humanoid fish creature, it's impractical. Uh, a human arm, which would, is how mythology often depicts mermaids, is not actually an efficient um, underwater uh, tool for a body to have. Arms are not particularly good at swimming. And other human features like hair and facial features and body features, they're not practical for underwater. But here's where it starts to get creepy. Okay, the human body can only spend X amount of time in water before it shrivels up, it prunes, it in fact it actually rots off the body if person's in the water long enough. But over time and through the generations, if people are more and more and more accustomed to being in water for longer periods of time in a controlled setting, theoretically they could develop resistance and then an immunity and develop adaptations. And this is where growth hormones come in, and the reproduction of these experiments can go about much faster, and it'll escalate, and it already has. And I know you're gonna stop and go, "What is the friggin' point?" I already said because they'll do it because they can. They want to see what happens. Create a freak show, all kinds of scary monsters and things like that. Um, yeah, that's all. It all sounds science fiction, but from a biological point of view, and with the kind of chemicals and drugs that they have these days, and the fact that they will have a system that will continue the program for as long as they want it to. These possibilities are more than fantasy. They're actually quite probable. And, they're done in secret laboratories and things like that. I mean, we've all seen things like how they grew a human ear on the back of a mouse and, other things as well. And a lot of people, and rightfully so, would be this is an abomination. This is, a perversion of science. And it is, but that doesn't stop people like that from doing it. And the thing is, when science has moved into that direction and they dehumanize their experiments, possibly because they've got them to the point where they don't look like normal people anymore, which wouldn't take that long. Um, it goes to show you how cruel and callous they really are, and that they don't care about human decency. And then, therefore, you as a regular person, to a lesser extent, of course, uh, the same treatment could happen to you. And that, getting back to the involuntary celibate thing and how they create monsters, because there have been other involuntary celibates who are nothing like me. I am nothing like them, who were indeed monsters, and the appropriate steps were not taken, and this was in the name of science. And science, in that regard, was a cunt, an absolute cunt. Um, and it still is most of the time. And these people who do these type of things do not deserve respect. They command it, but they don't deserve it. And it's not about, oh, you don't have to respect the person, respect the rank, and all that kind of shit. Fuck off. Don't respect anything about them. They're fucking. They should be the fucking experiment. No more than they deserve. But yeah, I know how that all sounds creepy, but I don't have links to the internet that seeing as that would be a secret body of the government, would not permit such a thing. So therefore, I do not have one. But if you use logic and you see other things that you know are not that far off and you wonder about those, but since they're watered down, you're not so concerned about it. But the mentality is still there. And, it's a confusing subject. And it's one of the hobbies I have is to try and think of confusing things and explain it to, in layman's terms to people. And that's, not easy to do. A lot of people have short attention spans, and it's not something you can explain in 5 minutes. I never went to biology class, not even in high school. I didn't take biology. I took earth science, and I didn't pay attention half the time. So this is unbiased, unstructured thought, and that's an advantage because I didn't read books that told me how to think, and in that sense, perhaps I can think of ideas that other people hadn't thought of. Mainstream people. I'm not a scientist in that regard. I don't agree with what they're doing, but that doesn't stop them from doing it anyway. And yeah, we can expect new species of animal in the future, new monsters, new stories, and possibly new ideas on certain things that are learned from these experiments, new creatures, new monsters. And, there are really spooky things that are associated with that kind of stuff. Like, there are a lot of animals that, or creatures, whatever they are, which happen to be too small to really be a problem for humans. I mean, you get poisonous toads, you got poisonous spiders, snakes, all those sort of things. Most of them are either isolated or they're too small really to be a problem. But like you take a bullfrog, for example, it is a vicious predator for its size. Um, very, very vicious. and through biological engineering, it could, they could make it a lot bigger, and then it would be a friggin' problem. And there's no guarantee from anyone that that isn't happening. No guarantee. And I rather doubt that it isn't, because there are a lot of people with sick, twisted opinions out there, and they keep it to themselves. And these are the exact same people that want to spy on other people. So it's like they're twice as evil. They want to hide the evil things they do, and they want to spy on innocent people. So it's like, okay, you're screwed up in two senses, at least. Um, and bullfrogs and making them bigger. That's an example. Um, and what more terrifying thing could that be? Uh, you know, being thrown in a pit with something like that in it. Ain't nobody gonna step out of line if they know that's what's out there waiting for them. Uh, and there are plenty of people who are simply as ugly. And through the generations in mainstream public opinion, even the most screwed up things can be presented in such a way that it's almost normal in mainstream society. Like, you would not believe how many Star Wars fans, like, seriously, they deserve to be thrown in a dumpster. And have half-eaten McDonald's burgers thrown at them or something, for the kind of people they are and the way they think. And like, it's no wonder that there are a lot of people who don't like Star Wars, but uh, there are things about Star Wars I like, but there are other things I don't like, obviously. And like the Force, for example, is a very real thing. It's not in the sense that you can lift something with your hand or your thoughts, but the ability to say something in such a way to people where they do what you want them to do or think the way you want them to think, is far older than George Lucas. George Lucas didn't invent that. He simply took something from history and pitched it into a character. Because George Lucas is not that intelligent. I mean, he made a movie, and he made some movies, and he did some things here and there, but he's simply a human. And to be honest with you, Return of the Jedi was a fucking terrible movie. And Empire Strikes Back, it was only cool because you know, it had things going on in it that made it cool. Like the Emperor and the Empire, and how it's taking care of business and all that sort of stuff. But they were okay movies, but they weren't that great. And a lot of people, they dedicated their lives to those type of things. And I know there were books and things like that, and people go, "Oh, that's canon, that's canon, that's canon, it's the real deal," and blah blah blah. And it's like, does it even really matter? I mean, George Lucas isn't the original inventor of the Star Wars. He just took ideas from something else and redistributed it and caricaturized it. Um, yeah, but yeah, yeah, get him, back to what the movie, not the movie, the video was about, which was mythical creatures and evolution, human experimentation, all these sorts of things. One day we may see mermaid type creatures, and they will be used for scary purposes, obviously. And yeah, that's kind of a terrifying thought. I know this all sounds out of the realm of paranoia, delusions, and things like that, but those are buzzwords to keep people quiet, to silence them, to get public opinion against what they think, so that they can continue doing what they're doing, and they don't have to fess up to it because they go, "Oh, that guy's paranoid, he's crazy, blah blah blah," and it's like it doesn't count. No, if you are doing those things, it doesn't matter if the person is as a hypothetical, crazy, insane, or paranoid. if they are doing those things, then it is accurate. And I'm just presenting this as a possibility, you know. Because there might be evolutionary advantages to Cyclops. Who the bloody hell knows? Like maybe they're immune to cancer or something like that. I don't know. But rest assured, there is some Poindexter asshole of a doctor who, you know, thinks that there could be a possibility. I mean, that that would be beneficial somehow to society or whatever, or it's a way for them to make money or something to do, make themselves feel important. And yeah, those are all creepy things, obviously. Um, well, I better uh, trail this video off. I'm getting kind of tired here. It's been one hell of a day. Um, yeah, there's so much more to this topic. I could continue talking, but I think I'll leave it for another video. Anyways, talk to people later. Have a good one.